hapon ulit, Malacañang Press Corps, and welcome to another press briefing. Joining us today are the members of the Anti-Terrorism Council from the Department of Justice. Let me introduce them to you. Undersecretary and Concurrent Spokesperson Nicolas Felix T. Assistant Secretary and Concurrent Deputy Spokesperson Miko Clavano. National Security Council Assistant Director General Jonathan Malaya. And Attorney Luis Warren from the Anti-Money Laundering Council. We are here for a special briefing about the recent designations made by the Anti-Terrorism Council. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Let me turn over the microphone to Attorney Clavano.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the press, esteemed members of the public. We speak here today on behalf of the Anti-Terrorism Council. The official spokesperson is Undersecretary Nicolas T, and I stand as the Deputy Spokesperson of the Anti-Terrorism Council. Thank you for joining us today on this important occasion. We are here to discuss a matter concerning our nation's safety and security. Today, the Anti-Terrorism Council, or the ATC, has taken a decisive step in the fight against terrorism. Based on probable cause and unwavering commitment, the ATC has officially designated individuals and groups that pose a grave threat to our nation's well-being. First, the MAUTE Group has long been identified as a terrorist organization, with ties to the ISIL and a history of violence culminating in the devastating Marawi siege in 2017. The designation of Hafida, Romato, MAUTE, and Nahara, Kahiria, City, Hamim as terrorists further solidify our resolve to combat terrorism at its roots. Additionally, we have designated Congressman Arnolfo A. Teves and his armed group, the Teves Terrorist Group, as terrorists. The decision comes after meticulous investigation into their violent activities that have caused harm to innocent lives in Negros Oriental, including that of Governor Roel Degamo. The Teves Terrorist Group's actions have sowed fear and intimidation among the residents of the province. The tragic incident on March 4, 2023, which claimed several lives and left many others injured, is a stark reminder of the threat posed by private armed groups within our country. The ATC's designation is not arbitrary, but based on compelling evidence and factual incidents in accordance with the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. We, the ATC, have found probable cause to warrant these designations, covering offenses related to committing terrorism, planning, training, preparing, and facilitating terrorist acts, recruitment and membership in a terrorist organization, as well as providing material support to terrorists. The designation of the MAUTE Group and the Teves Terrorist Group as terrorists is a significant stride towards addressing the proliferation and emergence of private armed groups within our nation. By identifying and confronting these threats head-on, we reinforce our commitment to upholding law and order, safeguarding our citizens, and ensuring the prevalence of peace and security in every corner of our beloved country. The ATC's main objective is to combat terrorism and ensure the safety and security of our citizens. The Anti-Terrorism Act was enacted to empower the government in its efforts to prevent and respond to acts of terrorism effectively. It is essential to note that for as long as violent acts fall within the definition of terrorism, the government will not hesitate to designate individuals or groups as such, as mandated by law to protect the greater welfare of our nation. Our commitment to combating terrorism and its root causes remains unwavering. President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. had a vision for us, for a peaceful and progressive nation, and this is what drives the ATC forward in this endeavor. By designating these individuals as terrorist groups, we take significant steps towards combating impunity and holding those responsible for acts of terrorism accountable. Our nation's safety and well-being are paramount, and we will continue to work tirelessly to dismantle terrorist groups and safeguard our communities. We would also like to emphasize that the decision to designate individuals and groups as terrorists is not taken lightly. The Anti-Terrorism Council conducts thorough investigations and considers compelling evidence and factual incidents before making such designations. The process is governed by the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 and adheres to the principles of due process and respect for the rule of law. Moreover, the designations made by the ATC are based on a separate and independent investigation. Together with our law enforcement agencies, we will work together and relentlessly in dismantling the organizations that seek to sow terror and chaos. We reaffirm our dedication to preserving the rule of law, protecting our citizens' rights and liberties, and creating an environment where all Filipinos can thrive without fear or intimidation. Thank you for your attention, and we remain steadfast in our pursuit of a peaceful and progressive Philippines. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. At the onset, let me just clarify that we are holding this press conference here in Malacañang precisely because the ATC is led by the Executive Secretary, and the Vice Chair is the National Security Advisor. So maybe some are wondering why not holding the DOJ. No? It's here because the ATC is attached to the Office of the President. So the National Security Council, led by National Security Advisor Eduardo Año, Vice Chair of the ATC, fully supports the designation of the following individuals as terrorists under the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. Hafida Romato MAUTE, the wife of the former Amir of the Islamic State, East Asia, Abu Zakaria, for violations of Section 4, Section 6, and facilitating the commission of terrorism under the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. Number 2, Nahara Khairiya Siti Hamim, the wife of Abu Mursid, the sub-leader in finance and logistics officer of the same organization for violation of Section 4 of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. And finally, Congressman Arnie Teves and his armed group as terrorist organization. Section 25 of RA 11479 bestows on the Anti-Terrorism Council the power to designate a person or an organization as a terrorist, making the power and the process executive in nature. We wish to emphasize that the killings in the province of Negros Oriental must not be taken as isolated incidents of violence unrelated to each other. These killings reveal an unmistakable pattern of being meticulously planned and executed to ensure the maximum effect on the population of Negros Oriental. The evidence gathered by the ATC compels us not to treat the killings, abuses, and the acquisition of high-powered firearms and explosives as independent and isolated crimes, because these acts are not committed just to cause injury to people or to grab property. These violent acts were motivated by the underlying objectives to intimidate the residents of Negros Oriental and create an atmosphere of and spread the message of fear. And he is using his position in government to thoroughly control the province through fear and intimidation. Therefore, we wish to clarify that the designation of Congressman Arnie Teves and his armed group is not solely premised on the assassination of Governor Digamo. Rather, the killing of Governor Digamo and his supporters helped the Anti-Terrorism Council establish the pattern of violent activities that warrant his designation and that of his group as a terrorist organization. This designation is necessary to address the significant threat posed by the Teves Group to the security and well-being of our nation, especially those residing in Negros Oriental. In conclusion, the designation of Kong Teves and his armed group as a terrorist organization is a significant step towards addressing the presence of private armed groups in the country, as it sends a clear message against them. Furthermore, it brings us closer to the goal of combating impunity, as these designations seek to hold accountable those who perpetrate acts of terrorism and violence in our country. The designation of the MAUTE and Teves groups as terrorists serves as a strong signal that the government is prepared to take decisive measures against any individual or organization that poses a threat to the safety and security of our citizens. Maraming salamat po.
Okay. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Clavano and Assistant Director General Malaya. At this point, we can have some questions. The first one is from Joyce Balancho of ABS-CBN.
Hello. Good afternoon po. Kay Attorney Clavano, you mentioned earlier there is probable cause to designate them as terrorists. Pero bakit nauna po yung designation before filing of cases?
Okay. So there's a difference no, between the threshold of evidence required dito sa ATC pati sa preliminary investigation. With designations, the threshold is probable cause. What the Secretary of Justice has done for preliminary investigations is raise the level of evidence required to probable cause with reasonable certainty of conviction, even if the department order or department circular only addressed certain crimes. It's been a policy of the department to already raise the level even for other cases. And the wheels of justice are turning, but they turn a bit slowly to afford the due process and to make the rule of law very evident. No? So when you compare and contrast the two processes, the process for designation does move a little faster since the nature of the designation is it's a purely executive act. And on the other side, you afford the due process, you afford the opportunity to be heard to the respondents in the case. That's the reason why nauna yung designation kaysa dun sa preliminary investigation. Yusek Nikki would like to add to that.
Designation is an independent proceeding from preliminary investigation. Preliminary investigation is a prelude to criminal action in the court if there is an indictment. Designation can come first, pwede ding it can come after. Nagkataon lang naman dito na nauna ang desisyon ng ATC sa designation versus sa resolution ng mga prosecutors natin sa pending PI. Isa sa mga dahilan kung bakit nauna yung ATC, tingin ko dahil yun sa ATC, ex parte process to, no? Under the procedure laid down by law and by the implementing rules and regulation, we're not required to hear from the respondents when it comes to designation. That is not the case in preliminary investigation, where the respondents have a right to be heard.
Follow-up lang po. Well, na-mention dun sa resolution yung some events, particularly yung case ni Governor Degamo. It did not mention about the recantation of the 10 suspects. So bakit hindi po siya na-mention? And yung timing then, after the recantation, then we have the designation now.
Implied yung recantations no sa resolution. Kung nakita nyo, it was mentioned there that there were preliminary statements that were made by the gunmen. Eventually, we know that these statements were recanted. But that doesn't mean that the preliminary statements are not of the record and cannot be considered as evidence. They were among the volumes of evidence that were considered by the TWG and eventually raised to the level of the ATC. They were not the only evidence, but they were among the evidence. Alam naman natin sa Supreme Court, nasabi na yan, diba, that recantations are not looked upon favorably. And recantations can still continue to be used as evidence because they are part of the record. As long as hindi lang kami sa kanila umasa, which is the case here.
Okay.
If I may add.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so in addition to what Undersecretary Nicholas T. mentioned, the recantations, as far as the DOJ is concerned, is looked upon with a lot of disfavor, as already mentioned. But in addition to that, the 10 recanting at the same time only furthers the theory that there really exists a conspiracy behind the recantations. Now, if you look at the timing of it all, if you look at the timeline, it was only when Marvin Miranda was arrested that the 10 recanted all of a sudden, and all within 1 week. So that in itself is already suspect, if you were to look at it from an outsider looking in, and more so when you know exactly what's going on the ground. So that's one of the reasons why we don't consider the recantations as a big blow to the case. In fact, it bolsters the theory of conspiracy further.
Okay. Next, we have Ivan Myrina, GMA 7.
What happens now? What does the terrorist tag bring to Congressman Teves? For example, I know his assets will be frozen. Is he now considered a fugitive? What happens to his status as a legislator? Will his passport be cancelled?
Well, the next steps will have to be taken deliberately and purposefully. We will respectfully decline to answer what our next steps are going to be, so as not to telegraph exactly the next moves of the government. No? But as for the assets to be frozen, I'd like to turn over the microphone to Attorney Luis Warren to explain a bit more about the procedure when it comes to the Anti-Money Laundering Council and what they do in times of designation.
The Anti-Money Laundering Council's issuance of a freeze order is based under the ATA's Section 25 in relation to Section 36. So upon the designation of an individual or organization, it is ministerial upon the part of the Anti-Money Laundering Council to issue an ex parte order to freeze without delay the assets of the subjects in this case. So that's all.
Status? Is he a fugitive?
No, he is not considered a fugitive, as this is separate and distinct from a criminal action. It is only when you are issued a warrant of arrest that you become a fugitive, or your status becomes a fugitive. Right now, he is designated as a terrorist, but that's as far as we go.
Okay. Evelyn Quiroz, Filipino Mirror.
Good afternoon. Bali, clarification lang, sinabi niyo po use secti na ex parte. Pag sinabing ex parte, hindi nahinga ng isang side. So, do you consider it na nabigyan ng due process si Congressman Teves?
Yun ang proseso na nakalagay sa ATC, no? Sa ATA at sa implementing rules, na ang designation, hindi kailangan marinig ang panig ng dinedesignate. Anong dahilan dito? Kung alam na niya na i-designate siya, siyempre tatakbuhin na niya yung mga assets na matatamaan ng designation. So designation is actually akin to a provisional remedy. And under the law, there are so many provisional remedies, so many processes in law that are actually ex parte. And our legal system recognizes the legality of ex parte processes. Hindi naman ibig sabihin na walang remedyo ang mga designees. Sa ATA at sa implementing rules, madaming mga remedyo ang mga designees pag na-designate sila. In fact, yung mga previously na-designate na dati ng ATA, yung mga related sa MAUTE at sa mga related sa CPP-NPA, they've availed of these remedies. I believe that the lawyers of some of the designees will already look into these possible remedies, so they can just look no further than the ATA and the implementing rules and regulations.
Okay. Sir, follow-up lang po. So, ang ibig sabihin ho ba, pag designated ka na, pwede nang maaresto sila yung without judicial warrant o talagang kailangan po ng court? Ang court po talaga yung...
Nasabi naman ni Asik Labano at ni Attorney Warren kanina, yung designation, ang consequence lang nito ay dun sa assets ng designee. Kung arresto ang pinag-uusapan natin, dadaan pa rin tayo dun sa criminal action. So pwedeng dun sa mga pending criminal cases before the DOJ, kung sakaling ma-indict, or kung may mga future cases pa na masasalang.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Vance Fernandez, Police Files.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. Regarding this, sir, asa na siya ngayon? And how close are we para mahuli siya?
Well, we have information that comes from different sources as to where he is. Ang gusto lang po namin siguro iparating sa kampo ni Congressman Teves ay harapin sana yung mga charges sa kanya. As of right now, it's in preliminary investigation. But even at that stage, there's still that opportunity to be heard. So kung talagang sinasabi niya na wala talaga siyang kinalaman dito, there's a proper forum for it. Hindi naman sa social media, wag naman ho sana sa mainstream media, pero dito po sa ating venue, which is the preliminary investigation, where he is asked to file his counter-affidavit. Kaya natin hinihintay po yung lahat ng periods kasi hindi po siya nagpa-participate. So, we have to let all these periods run to afford him that due process para po talagang susundin natin yung proseso at wala sila pong masabi dun sa ginawa nating procedure. So, to answer your question as to where he is, we have sources, but at the same time, yun nga, yung mensahe po sana namin sa kanila ay harapin na lang siguro yung mga charges where they should be faced. Not in media, not on social media, but in the preliminary investigation.
Okay, sir. Another question. Any comment from you, gentlemen, regarding Teves' lawyer's statements commenting the recent designation of his client as a terrorist?
I didn't really get to read his statement, but I can probably just say that it cannot be understated kung gaano ka-importante at gaano ka-crucial yung role ng Anti-Terrorism Council dito sa peace and order issue natin sa Pilipinas. No? And I think anything that a lawyer of a certain client will say will definitely be for and behalf of his client. Ang sa amin lang naman, ginagawa namin yung trabaho namin, ginagawa namin lahat ng tamang procedure para po wala talagang masabi yung mga designees natin. No? We followed the proper procedure in the sense that we looked at compelling evidence, we looked at the factual incidents to determine whether or not there was probable cause for the designees, no, to be designated as terrorists. So I think, I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question because I haven't read the statement, pero siguro yun lang ang gusto naming ipaalala sa taong bayan na talagang ginagawa lang namin ito para magkaroon ng peace and order sa ating bansa. Ito rin ay binanggit ni Presidente sa kanyang SONA that for the economy to thrive, there has to be a stable peace and order situation in the country.
Thank you, sir.
Dagdag lang ako. May prosesong nakalagay sa batas at sa implementing rules and regulations na susundan ng ATA upang mag-designate ng isang tao o isang grupo bilang terorista. Matitiyak ko na sinundan talaga ng TWG ang proseso na to at ang recommendation ng TWG ay unanimously in-adopt ng ATC. No? 9 out of 9 ATC members agreed to approve the recommendation. And there were, I think, 13 out of 15 supporting agencies of the ATC who were present in the meeting, and they likewise posed no objection. So kung pinag-uusapan natin ay due process, ay rule of law, kayang-kaya namin pagtanggol na sinundan namin ang due process at rule of law sa pag-designate sa grupo ni Congressman Teves or sa kahit ano pang designation na nangyayari sa ATC.
Sir,
One more question. Follow up? Go ahead.
You gentlemen, are you not afraid saying that he's a terrorist?
Well, we would have been afraid if there was no evidence. But ang sinasabi ho natin, may ebidensya. Nakita ho natin on the ground kung ano talagang nararamdaman ng mga tao sa Negros Oriental. Meron po tayong higit 50 na affidavits na nagsasabi na takot sila at yung dahilan kung bakit ayaw gumalaw ng police ay dahil din sa takot. Although of course these are all written down as affidavits, it just goes to show that there really is that widespread fear and intimidation present in Negros Oriental. And ang sa amin lang naman ho, hindi ba gusto ko lang balikan kung ano nangyari nung March 4 kung saan may 10 na namatay and 18 ang nasugatan. No? And this happened in broad daylight sa loob ng bahay ni Governor Degamo kung saan nagbibigay siya ng ayuda para sa kanyang mga constituents. Tignan na lang natin yon, no? Na gaano ka-brazen, gaano kasama yung ganong pangyayari. Kaya ang sinasabi lang ho namin, kung walang ebidensya, siguro matatakot kami kasi tinatawagan namin siyang terorista, walang basis. Pero ang ginawa ho namin, tinignan namin lahat ng anggulo dito. wala kaming hindi tinignan na statement because it would be the height of injustice kung sinabi namin ito na walang ebidensya. At alam ho namin yan. Alam namin kung gaano kabigat itong tag na to, na terorista. Kaya hindi namin basta-bastang gagawin yon. Ang ginawa ho namin, dumaan kami sa tamang proseso.
Thank you very much.
Last question is from Tuesday New of DZBB.
Good afternoon.
Let me add lang. Let me add lang dun sa sinabi. Hindi kami natatakot, no, we're not. No? Una-una, ito yung trabaho namin. Ba't kami natatakot? Kung takot kami sa trabaho namin, mag-resign na lang kami. Di ba? Pangalawa, we're doing this for the benefit of the people of Negros Oriental. No? Precisely the reason for the designation, aside from the freezing of the assets, ay matanggalan ng pangil yung mga teroristang grupong ito in Negros Oriental. No? The people there are apparently living in a life of fear and intimidation na perpetrated by the Teves Terrorist Group. And that is exactly the signal that we want to send to the people of Negros Oriental para mawalan ng pangil, mawalan ng lakas ng loob. Because if you are designated as a terrorist organization, that is a serious designation. And our desire here is for him and his group to stop what he's doing. So that is the practical benefit to government. No? The terrorist designation serves to return the province to the peace and order situation na gusto nating mangyari doon sa lugar na yun.
Go ahead, Tuesday.
Good afternoon po. Sir, sabi niyo kanina ang implication ng pag-designate kay Congressman Teves is may kaugnayan dun sa assets niya. So, effective na po ba yung pag-freeze ng assets niya? How much? At speaking of assets, siya lang ba o kasama yung assets ng the whole members of the family?
Okay. Insofar as the implementation of the freeze order, simultaneous with the publication of the designation of the Teves Group as well as the MAUTE Group was the publication of the freeze order insofar as the property and accounts of the subjects in this case. So if I may, we have a list of the individuals identified. Only those people who were specifically identified under the ATC resolution are subject of the freeze order. Now, insofar as how much has been frozen, since this was only implemented this morning, the banks have only been notified this morning. We are receiving reports and returns as we speak.
The whole family, sir?
Not the whole family, only the individuals specifically identified and mentioned in the resolution.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. This ends our briefing with the Department of Justice. Thank you, Yusek T. Asek Clavano, Assistant Director General Malaya, and Attorney Luis Warren. And maraming salamat, Malacañang Press Corps. Thank you.